We had been best friends since we were 5. Everyone knew that she and I were in love, but we did not. I met Julia when her family moved into the house next door. My mother, determined to be neighborly, made me bring over a giant plate of chocolate chip cookies. I found Julia sitting on her front steps, wearing a fierce frown that made her look older than 5. She was miserable about leaving her old friends behind in New Jersey. I told her she could share my friends if she wanted. She looked me up and down, squinted, and declared that girls had cooties. Offended, I took the entire plate and dumped the cookies on her head. The moment she laughed, we were inseparable. That incident established the tone for the next 16 years: easy chaos, absolute proximity, and complete, shared denial. For the rest of our childhood, everything was experienced as a unit: Thomas and Julia. We were an institution in our small town, our names spoken together, so often they felt like a single noun. I walked her to school every morning, even through high school, when the guys on the baseball team gave me endless grief about it. I never missed a single one of her art shows, and she went to every single one of my baseball games, even the away ones that required 3-hour bus rides. She had a whole routine where she would paint my jersey number, 11, on her cheek and scream louder than any of the actual girlfriends in the stands. People would constantly ask if we were dating, and we would both laugh until we cried, rolling our eyes like the suggestion was genuinely absurd. We were not boyfriend and girlfriend. We were simply Thomas and Julia, which was somehow bigger and smaller at the same time. It was a dynamic of such intense comfort and security that the thought of changing it felt like an existential threat. Our intimacy was built not on romance, but on shared humiliation and knowledge. She had seen me at my most physically awkward through braces, severe acne, and that infamous period in 7th grade when I thought I was cool for listening exclusively to emo bands. I, in turn, had seen her through the chickenpox, her unfortunate perm sophomore year, and the tearful burial of her 3rd grade hamster. How could you date someone who had helped you dispose of small, deceased rodents? It felt impossible to cross a line that had been so actively avoided and defended for so long. We convinced ourselves that growing up together made us basically siblings, creating an emotional force field against any romantic thought. The first real threat came with college. I got into State University for engineering, a big campus an hour away. Julia went to the art school 40 minutes in the opposite direction for graphic design. The physical distance was the first real variable introduced into the equation of our lives. I found myself calling her when I felt overwhelmed by my complex thermodynamics labs. She would call me, sometimes in tears, about her miserable, judgmental roommate. Our routine snapped back immediately to compensate for the distance. We made a strict, unspoken pact to have dinner together every Sunday, no matter what. Sometimes, those meals meant meeting halfway at this horribly tacky diner. The food was terrible. The coffee tasted like motor oil, and the eggs were always rubbery. But it was exactly 20 minutes from both our schools. Those Sundays were my mental reset button. Sitting across from her, trading stories about our demanding professors and sharing a basket of greasy fries, was the only thing that kept me sane. Clinging to that ritual reinforced the truth that, even with separate majors and different schools, our lives still orbited each other. We might have had different futures planned, but the core foundation, the Thomas and Julia unit, was absolutely non-negotiable. It was the safe harbor I did not realize I would eventually have to sail away from if I ever wanted to learn how to stand on my own. Our Sunday dinner routine held fast for 2 years, but by junior year, the emotional landscape had changed. We were no longer simply fighting distance. We were fighting the reality of external lives taking root. The safe little bubble we had carefully constructed around our friendship began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a tight, suffocating space. I knew it was normal for things to evolve, but I was not prepared for how violently my chest reacted to the evidence of Julia's expanding world. The real invasion began when I started dating Becca. She was in my engineering program at State University, smart, determined, and absolutely stunning in that put-together way I found intimidating. We clicked immediately over shared stress about differential equations and a mutual love for obscure science fiction novels. Becca represented my adult life, my career, my future. She was everything that Julia was not: a fresh start, A new relationship without 16 years of baggage. I told myself this was good and healthy, a sign I was finally growing up. Julia started dating too. Her boyfriend was Daniel, a kind of ethereal painter from her advanced studio class. He wore scarves indoors and spoke thoughtfully about color palettes. Daniel was sweet and funny, and I hated him instantly. He was the opposite of me in every conceivable way, which only highlighted how little Julia and I had changed since childhood. I convinced myself that she was happy, which meant I had to be happy too. The problem was that Becca and Daniel were external variables that did not fit neatly into the equation of Thomas and Julia. The four of us attempted awkward double dates, and they were universally awful. We went to movies where Daniel kept trying to hold Julia's hand during dramatic scenes. We ate at loud sports bars where Becca tried to engage me in conversation about structural loads while Julia watched us with unnerving intensity. They were all trying too hard to make it work, to blend the two halves of our separate lives. But the attempt only made the divide more glaring. I would catch Julia's eye across the table, a flicker of shared humor over something Daniel said, and then quickly look away. Making eye contact felt like a betrayal of the person sitting next to me. The most painful part was that Becca was genuinely nice. She was never hostile. She would ask with genuine curiosity how long Julia and I had been friends, and then comment on how cute it was, as if our shared history was a charming novelty rather than the bedrock of my entire existence. It stripped our relationship of its significance and framed it as something childish that should eventually be outgrown. On our sacred Sunday dinners, Becca increasingly became a topic, then a presence. I still showed up at the crappy diner, but now I spent half the meal texting her or explaining why I had to leave promptly at 7 o'clock. For the first time in my life, Julia was not the center of my gravitational pull. The shift was agonizingly slow, like watching a glacier move, but the impact was devastating. One evening, Julia called, upset because she had failed a major design project. I was at Becca's place and told Julia I could not talk long. The silence that followed was heavy with disappointment. I felt a pang of guilt, but immediately buried it, rationalizing that this was normal adult behavior, and I had to prioritize my future. I knew that Julia was doing the same with Daniel. She would talk about the funny things he said in painting class, or the strange art gallery openings they went to. She was building memories I was not part of, and the jealousy was a cold, sharp feeling in my gut. I told myself I was simply missing my best friend, that this feeling was rooted in comfort and habit, not romance. But deep down, sitting across from her at the greasy diner, I knew the real pain came from the realization that someone else was taking my place, and the easy answer of, "We were like siblings," was growing dangerously thin. I kept clinging to the safety of our ritual, fearing that if I acknowledged the truth, I might lose her completely. The simmering resentment and quiet competition of junior year came to a head in the spring of our senior year. The external threats we had navigated, Becca, Daniel, the distance, suddenly merged into one massive ultimatum that obliterated our fragile balance. Becca got into graduate school in California. It was the absolute top program for her field. A huge opportunity that she had worked tirelessly for. When she told me, I was genuinely thrilled for her. But then she followed the news with a speech about our future. She said it was time for me to move with her, to leave behind the obligations of childhood and start our real lives together on the West Coast. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the childhood thing she was asking me to leave behind was Julia. I told Julia about the California plan during our Sunday dinner, which was already strained with weeks of suppressed tension. I tried to sound casual, as if the decision was purely a logistical one. I listed the engineering opportunities, I complimented Becca, and I said she should absolutely go because it was an amazing career step. The entire time, my stomach was twisted into knots. I was waiting for Julia to give me permission, to say it was okay to choose this other path. Julia stared at me for the longest time, her expression completely unreadable. The diner was loud, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air, but all I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "You should absolutely go," she said. "Becca is amazing, and California has great engineering jobs." Then she added, "That's what you want, right?" I nodded quickly, feeling suddenly hollow. "Yeah," I mumbled. I was right. That night, I went back to my dorm and felt a wave of crushing inevitability wash over me. The friendship was ending, whether I moved or stayed. 2 weeks later, Daniel broke up with Julia. He did it quietly, but with surgical precision. He told her she was clearly in love with someone else, and that he deserved better than being second choice. When Julia told me this over the phone, I wanted to argue, to defend her and our platonic bond. But I couldn't. I just listened, knowing that Daniel, the outsider, had seen the truth that Julia and I had spent 16 years denying. He had called out the massive, unspoken obstacle that blocked every single one of our relationships. The truth did not save us. It merely cleared the path for a different disaster. The week before graduation, I broke up with Becca. I couldn't do it. I couldn't commit to a life where my entire support structure, my safety net, was 3,000 miles away. Becca was hurt, but not entirely surprised. She knew the pull Julia had on me, even if we called it friendship. She asked me to choose between her and Julia, and I found I couldn't choose Becca. I stayed. I showed up at Julia's apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was not unusual for me to show up unannounced, but this time, I was completely sober and felt destroyed. I told her I had ended things with Becca moments ago because she had asked me to choose, and I couldn't choose to leave Julia. I expected her to thank me, to hug me, to tell me I did the right thing for our friendship. Instead, she called me an idiot for ruining my future over a friendship. That was the moment I snapped. "That's the problem," I said, the words coming out rough and desperate. "You aren't just my friend, Julia. You haven't been for years." Then I finally stopped thinking, stopped analyzing, and stopped hiding. I kissed her. The kiss was clumsy and sudden, a desperate collision of 18 years of suppressed longing and fear. When she pulled back, her whole body was shaking, and the smell of midnight air rushed into the space between us. Her eyes were wide, scared and hopeful at the same time. We had just crossed a line that we could never, ever uncross, and we both knew it instantly. My mind, usually so focused on logic and engineering principles, was racing to find the perfect thing to say, the justification for destroying our careful world. But all that came out was a terrified whisper. "Did you really break up with Becca for me?" I just nodded, feeling like it was the most obvious, catastrophic answer in the world. We sat down on her apartment steps, the air thick with the smell of damp night and the sheer weight of our history. We didn't touch. We just stared at each other, the silence vibrating with the sound of our hearts pounding. Her roommate, Raina, came home early and found us like that, fully dressed and passed out on opposite ends of the couch after talking all night. Raina took one look, screamed, and declared, "Everyone has been waiting for this since you were kids." Her reaction made the impossible real. The kiss had exposed a truth that shattered the old world, leaving us with a frightening, fragile new beginning built on fear and a colossal mistake. Raina's scream had made the impossible transition from friends to couple feel terrifyingly real. Everyone knew. That was the phrase that haunted me over the next few days as Julia and I navigated our new reality. We had kissed, we had confessed feelings, but we had absolutely no idea how to be a couple after 16 years of being a singular unit. I sent Julia a text asking her out for coffee near campus, an attempt at a proper, first official date. It felt ridiculous, like we were playing pretend in someone else's relationship. We went to a small coffee shop we had visited literally 100 times before. Suddenly, every glance was charged. Every touch was freighted with history and the possibility of a future. I kept falling back into best friend mode, telling her about my annoying lab partner and complaining about a structural engineering project, then catching myself and awkwardly trying to inject romance. I was so nervous that I knocked over my coffee cup twice. The second time, the dark liquid splashed across the table, and we both jumped up, grabbing napkins, dissolving into the familiar laughter we had shared since we were 5. The laughter was a relief, but it also felt like a retreat. When we walked back toward campus, I reached for her hand. It felt warm and familiar, but also completely wrong, heavy with an intention it had never held before. We had held hands countless times as children, running from an angry dog, crossing a busy street. But this was different, and I did not know how to be different with Julia. I knew her soul, her history, and her worst habits, but I did not know her as a girlfriend, and the gap felt insurmountable. The struggle intensified over the next few weeks as graduation approached and real-world decisions had to be made. Julia had received a compelling job offer from a fantastic design firm 2 hours away in the city. She wanted it desperately, and I knew she deserved it. When she told me, I immediately felt the familiar pull of anxiety. I had also received job offers, one local and one in her new city. Without consulting her, I immediately decided to take the local offer. I offered a vague excuse about staying close to my family, but I knew the real reason I could not bear to put 2 hours of distance between us. I had just ruined my relationship with Becca and potentially my career trajectory to be near Julia, and I was not about to risk losing her to a new city. Right after we finally got together, when I told Julia about my decision, the fight was immediate and ugly. "You should take the city job," I insisted, trying to sound supportive. "And you should take the job that is best for you," she countered, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "Not the one that is closest to me. I just want us in the same city," I argued, but the words felt hollow even to me. Julia's eyes flashed. "I am not Becca." "Thomas," she stated, using my full name, which immediately signaled the severity of the argument. "I will not rearrange my entire life just because you finally decided we were together. I need to know you want your own life." I realized she heard exactly what I had intended to hide. I expected her to be the beneficiary of my sacrifice, and sooner or later, I would resent her for it. I accused her of being unfair. She accused me of being selfish. We were really arguing about being terrified. The conflict felt personal and inescapable, a devastating consequence of the rushed transition. We did not speak for 3 days. The air was thick with the guilt of the choice I had made and the resentment Julia felt toward my emotional dependence. Just before my graduation party, my sister, Aria, pulled me aside near the kitchen, away from the loud congratulations. Aria is a therapist, and she has always seen straight through my defenses. "Are you sure about this relationship, Thomas?" she asked, her voice low and serious. She didn't mean my feelings, she meant the structure of it. She pointed out that I had been making decisions based on what I thought Julia wanted since we were children. She rattled off examples. "You dumped your juice box because she didn't like the flavor when you were 5. You quit the chess club because she thought it was boring when you were 12. And now you've turned down California for her." The comparison to the juice box and the professional job offer was jarring. "I'm worried," Aria finished, "that you don't know who you are without her." Her words landed like a physical blow. They confirmed Julia's accusations and my deepest, unacknowledged fear. I had been so focused on ensuring Julia would not become the sacrificing girlfriend. I had completely failed to notice that I had already become the sacrificing boyfriend. I realized I was actively losing myself, and the person I was supposed to be in love with was the only one who had the courage to tell me. The love we shared was built on a flaw, a structural weakness that would inevitably cause the entire thing to crumble. I was standing at my own graduation party, supposedly starting my life, and I felt nothing but panic and dread. I watched Julia laughing with my mother, and all I could see was the weight of 16 years of expectation settling onto her shoulders. The fight, followed by Aria's devastating observation, confirmed that our rushed romance was fundamentally flawed. We could not be a couple until we figured out how to be separate people. 2 months after graduation, the inevitable became official. Julia moved 2 hours away to start her amazing job at the design firm, and I was working at a local engineering office I hated, designing mundane foundations for strip malls. I visited her on weekends, and the visits were tense. I was tired and frustrated, complaining about my boss, and Julia was vibrant and busy, buzzing with new ideas. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom at my parents' house and found myself drawn back to my laptop. I stared at the screen, clicking through job listings, filtering by location, focusing only on California. I was not looking for a job, I was looking at the life I had rejected. Julia walked in and found me staring at the screen. The air immediately tightened. "Do you regret it?" she asked directly. Turning down Becca's plan. I was quiet for a long time. I couldn't lie, not to her, not anymore. "Sometimes," I admitted, the word tasting like ash. "I wonder what my life would look like if I had chosen differently. If I had chosen what was just for me." That conversation was the beginning of the end for our current configuration. We spent the rest of the night talking about what we actually wanted versus what we thought we should want. We both agreed something had to change. We decided to try long distance, but intentionally. I took a slightly better engineering job 3 hours away, still close enough to visit, but far enough to establish separation. The first month of long distance was terrible, but for an unexpected reason. We were used to being in constant, easy contact, but now we had to schedule phone calls like strangers. I would call during my lunch break, but she would be stuck in a client meeting. She would text me at night, and I would already be asleep because I had to wake up early for the commute. We were going through the motions of commitment, but the connection was being stretched thin and frayed. Julia, however, started thriving in the distance. She threw herself into her design projects and started making friends at her firm. She would go to art galleries on weekends with them, and she started realizing she was having fun without me being the source of it. She told me it felt like a simultaneous sense of freedom and loss. I could hear it in her voice, a new lightness that had not been there when I was the center of her world. I started to see the same thing in myself, though it brought immediate, sharp guilt. I began taking a pottery class someone at work mentioned. The studio smelled like wet clay, and the process was slow and mindful. For 2 hours every Thursday, I was not Thomas the engineer, or Thomas the devoted boyfriend, or Thomas the guilty one. I was just Thomas, trying not to make a sad pancake of my clay. I liked the focus, the people in the class. A quiet guy named Noah and a middle school teacher named Sarah were friendly. We joked about our terrible bowls while cleaning up. My apartment, which I had furnished with the expectation of Julia visiting frequently, slowly began to fill up with things I had chosen for myself: pottery tools, graphic novels, a painting I bought at a downtown art market. These items had nothing to do with our shared history. They were things I chose because I liked them, not because they reminded me of some memory we shared. 4 months into long distance, we were barely talking beyond quick updates about work projects. One afternoon, I was walking back to the office from a coffee run with a coworker named Caleb, discussing an obscure graphic novel series. When I got back to my desk, I realized I had not checked my phone once. I had not thought about Julia all day. The realization hit me with the force of a confession. That night, when we finally did talk, the conversation was forced and empty, two polite people exchanging corporate updates. I hung up the phone and stared at my screen. I wanted to text her that I missed her, but I stopped, unsure if it was true anymore. I felt like I was betraying something every time I laughed at a joke she had not heard, or made plans she was not part of, but the feeling of having space to figure out who I was without her constant presence felt like necessary oxygen. I was building a life, not as part of Thomas and Julia, but as just Thomas, and I did not know if that was growth or the beginning of a profound loss. The forced emptiness of our calls and the quiet joy of our separate lives had become the new normal 4 months into long distance. We were two strangers who used to know everything, exchanging hollow updates. The breakdown came one Tuesday night at 11 o'clock. My phone rang. It was an odd time for Thomas to call. We usually scheduled our conversations during the day. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct made me pick up. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something was profoundly wrong. He was crying so hard that his words were fractured and hard to understand. "I feel stuck, Julia," he managed to say between gasps. "I feel invisible, like my life is just paused." I sat on my bed, gripping the phone tightly, trying to make sense of the sudden, raw despair. He talked about his engineering job. It was fine. His apartment was fine. Everything was technically fine. But he felt like he was disappearing into a life he hadn't chosen. He confessed that he only took the position because it was close enough to visit me on weekends, not because it was what he wanted for his career. That lack of desire felt like a personal failure. The words tumbled out, fast and painful, revealing years of suppressed need. "I don't even know what I want anymore," he admitted. "Needing to be near you has always felt like the only thing that mattered." He had spent so long prioritizing my needs and proximity that he had erased his own desires. The confession was devastating because I realized I was staring at the consequence of my own fear. I had been so worried about becoming the codependent partner that I hadn't realized I was the object of codependency. I finally found my voice. "Thomas," I asked, "what would you want, truly, if I wasn't in the picture?" The silence that followed stretched out for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, defeated. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know how to want things for myself." I realized we had both been doing the exact same thing, making decisions out of fear instead of desire. He took the job to stay close, scared of losing me. I had taken my job partly because it was far enough away to prove I could exist without him, scared of engulfing him. We had both been so terrified of losing each other that we had stopped building actual, viable lives. Lying in bed after we hung up, I knew that loving someone shouldn't mean putting your whole life on hold, but somehow, that is exactly what we had done to each other. The official breakup conversation took place 6 months after graduation over video chat. Thomas's face on my laptop screen looked tired, sad, and strangely peaceful. We had been dancing around it for weeks, the calls growing shorter and more awkward until we were barely acquaintances. "Maybe we rushed into romance," Thomas said softly, his eyes meeting mine on the screen. "Maybe we should have just stayed friends." I nodded, even though hearing the words out loud felt like something was snapping inside my chest. We talked about how our history meant we assumed we could skip steps, moving directly from best friends to couple, without first learning how to be separate, functioning people. We acknowledged that the entire relationship had been built on a foundation of 16 years of fear. "I need time to figure out who I am without you, Julia," he said. "And I need the same thing, Thomas," I agreed. We decided on a real break, no contact for a while, not the fake kind where you still text every day pretending you are giving space. When we hung up, I closed my laptop and the screen went black. I sat there in the silence for a minute, just breathing in the reality. Then, the grief hit. I cried harder than I had in years. It was not just the pain of a breakup, it was the pain of losing a piece of myself, the Thomas and Julia Lim I had had since I was 5 years old. I had spent more of my life with him than without him, and now I had to figure out how to be a whole person alone. The depth of the loss was overwhelming. It was the necessary pain, the emotional surgery we had avoided for years finally performed. The old dynamic was gone, destroyed to make room for whatever we might become next. 6 months passed in absolute silence, the longest we had ever gone without speaking since we were 5. The grief had subsided, replaced by a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. I focused on my design firm, found confidence in my pottery class, and learned to define my life by the things I chose for myself. At Thanksgiving, I drove home dreading the inevitable awkwardness, but I was determined to face it as just Julia. My mother mentioned casually that Thomas was visiting his family next door. My stomach dropped, that familiar, unwanted anxiety returning immediately. I spent Saturday inside, hyper-aware of every car door and every sound from the house next door. I was terrified of running into him. Sunday morning, I woke up early. I made coffee in the kitchen and looked out the window. My breath caught. Thomas was sitting on his front steps. He was wearing an old hoodie and jeans, just staring into the suburban quiet, exactly as he used to when we were kids. When he looked up and saw me through the window, our eyes met, and the months of separation evaporated. He looked different, more solid and real, somehow, like he had finally grown into the person he was meant to be. He raised his hand in a small, tentative wave. Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my jacket and went outside. We ended up talking for 4 hours on his front steps. At first, it was excruciatingly polite, careful words chosen to avoid the gaping holes in our conversation. But then Thomas started talking about his therapy sessions, and I forgot to be nervous. He said his therapist helped him realize he had been afraid to want things for himself because he thought needing me made him weak, while taking care of me made him strong. He had spent so many years being the person who took care of me that he had forgotten how to let himself need anything at all. I told him about my pottery class, the art markets, and how terrified I had been that building a life without him meant I didn't love him anymore. I confessed that I had pushed him away because I was so afraid of becoming the sacrificing partner that he would eventually resent like Becca. He said he understood that fear now, that we had both been so afraid of the wrong things that we ran from the right ones. It felt like being best friends again, that easy, comfortable rhythm. But it was also profoundly different because we were not hiding anything. We were just Thomas and Julia, two separate people comparing notes on the strangers we had become. Then Thomas pulled out his phone. He showed me a job offer he had received. It was with a major engineering firm, working on specialized projects he actually cared about, and it was located in my city, 2 hours away. "I interviewed for this a month ago," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "I didn't tell you because I needed to know I was making the choice for myself." He stated firmly that he was taking the position regardless of what happened with us, because it was what he wanted for his career. Something shifted in my chest when he said that. For the first time since we were 5 years old, Thomas had made a choice that was truly his own. He wasn't following me or sacrificing his dream. He was building his life, and I just happened to be in the same city. I asked him what this meant for us. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "I don't know," he said, "but maybe we could figure it out. I want to try again, Julia, but differently this time, without all the fear and the history weighing us down." I realized I wanted that too. I wanted to see who we could be when we were both whole, choosing each other instead of needing each other. We agreed to start over slowly when he moved to my city in January. We would date like normal people instead of assuming our 16 years of history meant we could skip steps. Our first official new date was at a coffee shop near my apartment. Thomas showed up with flowers, which was so ridiculously formal that we both laughed until we cried. We were trying to be romantic, but kept stumbling back into best friend mode, trading campus gossip, complaining about former professors, then catching ourselves and trying again. When he walked me home, he kissed me goodnight at my door. This kiss was intentional, careful, and less scared than the desperate collision on my apartment steps months ago. It felt right because it was a choice, not a mistake. The next 6 months were hard work. We had to learn how to be a couple while also being two separate people, and it did not come naturally. We fought constantly about boundaries. I had to resist the urge to fall back into our old pattern of doing everything together. Thomas had to learn to tell me when he needed space instead of just disappearing. In April, we had a huge fight. I made plans with my pottery class friends on a night Thomas wanted to see me. He accused me of choosing them over him. That is exactly the kind of thinking that broke us up the first time. I shot back. "I need my own life, Thomas. I am not sacrificing my friendships just because we are together now." We did not talk for 3 days, and I was terrified we were going to end up back where we started. But then he called, apologized, and said his therapist helped him see he was falling into old fears. We talked it through, figuring out a healthier rhythm. Slowly, we found a balance where we could be close without losing ourselves. The final test came a year into our renewed relationship. Thomas's company offered him a promotion that would require moving to their California office. It was a massive opportunity. He kept it secret for 2 weeks, and I only found out because he accidentally left the offer letter on my kitchen counter. I was hurt he hid it, but then I realized he was doing the work alone, figuring it out for himself. We talked about it that night. He was genuinely torn, saying the promotion was amazing, but he truly loved the project he was currently on. I told him honestly this time that I would be sad if he left, but I wanted him to choose what was best for his career. I meant it. I wanted Thomas to have the life he wanted, even if that meant long distance or another separation. He looked at me for a long time, searching my face. Then he said he was turning it down. Not because of me, but because he genuinely preferred his current project and team. The California office would mean starting over, and he liked where he was. I believed him, and that felt huge. It was the moment I realized the codependency was truly dead. We were two whole people, and he was choosing his life, which just happened to include me. The decision about the California job solidified our new, healthier foundation. We had done the hard work of building two separate, whole lives, which finally allowed us to fully embrace standing together. 2 years after that first confusing kiss, Thomas and I were at the same terrible diner where we used to have our college Sunday dinners. The food was still inexplicably bad, but we kept returning because the location had become a monument to our entire, messy history. Thomas was nervous through the whole meal, dropping his fork twice and barely touching his burger. I braced myself, thinking another conflict was coming. Then, he reached across the table and took my hand. He said he had spent the last 2 years learning how to be his own person, and the best part was that being his own person made him want to be with me even more. He pulled out a ring and asked me to marry him. I said yes immediately. I was not scared anymore. I was not afraid that loving him meant losing myself, or that he would secretly resent me for what he had given up. We had fought to figure out who we were alone, and now we got to choose each other, not because we needed to, but because we desperately wanted to. Our union felt earned. Planning the wedding turned into a strange, wonderful reality check. I realized I was scheduling separate friend tables for Thomas and me because we had built actual, distinct lives apart from each other. My pottery class friends sat on one side. His work buddies from the engineering firm sat on the other. It was proof that we were not those desperate kids who could not function without each other nearby. We had our own hobbies, our own people, and our own bad days that the other person did not have to fix. Thomas would come home frustrated about a project, and I would listen without trying to solve it, because that was his job to handle. I had a gallery rejection that stung, and Thomas hugged me, but he did not take it personally, like it was happening to him too. We were actively choosing each other every single day, rather than just defaulting to each other because we always had been together. The wedding day arrived. Thomas's sister, Araya, stood up to give her speech. She looked at us, her eyes bright with tears, and talked about watching us spend 16 years perfecting friendship and then 2 years completely rebuilding everything we thought we knew about love. She said she had never seen two people work harder to figure out how to be both independent and together. Later, as Thomas and I danced, his hand steady and warm on my back, I thought about how close we had come to losing everything. Every fight we had about space, every night we had spent apart learning who we were alone, had led to this moment. I knew exactly who I was, and I still chose him. He looked at me and smiled, and I knew he was thinking the same thing. We had done it the hard way, the messy way, the way that almost destroyed us, but we had finally figured out how to choose our best friend properly.